Hello students, let us study the fourth chapter of history, the Central Islamic lands. In this module, we will study sources to understand the history of Central Islamic land, the rise of Islam in Arabia, the Caliphate and their contributions, administrative changes introduced by the Caliphs, the Umayyads and the changes introduced by them in administration, changes introduced by Abdal-Malik. First, let us study the sources to understand the history of Central Islamic land. Semi-historical works such as biographies, records of the sayings and the doings of the Prophet, and commentaries of the Quran are also available for us to study the history of these lands. The material from which these works were produced was a large collection of eyewitness reports transmitted over a period of time, either orally or on paper. The authenticity of each report was tested by a critical method which traced the chain of transmission and established the reliability of the narrator. Christian chronicles written in Syriac are fewer, but they throw interesting light on the history of early Islam. Besides chronicles, we have legal texts, geographies, travel logs, and literary works such as stories and poems. The rise of Islam in Arabia. The Prophet Muhammad was an Arab by language and culture and a merchant by profession. The Arabs were divided into tribes, each led by a chief who was chosen partly on the basis of his family connections, but more for his personal courage, wisdom, and generosity. Each tribe had its own god or goddesses, who was worshipped as an idol in a shrine. Many Arab tribes were nomadic, moving from dry to green areas of the desert in search of food and fodder for their camels. Muhammad's own tribe, Quraysh, lived in Mecca and controlled the main shrine where a cube-like structure called Kaaba, in which idols were placed. Even tribes outside Mecca considered the Kaaba holy and installed their own idols at this shrine, making annual pilgrimages to the shrine. Mecca was located on the crossroads. Around 612, Muhammad declared himself to be the messenger of God who had been commanded to preach that Allah alone should be worshipped. The worship involved simple rituals such as distributing alms and abstaining from theft. Islamic calendar. The Hijri era was established during the Caliphate of Umar, with the first year falling in 622 CE. A date in the Hijri calendar is followed by the letters AH. The Hijri year is a lunar year of 354 days, 12 months, Muharram to Dhul Hijjah of 29 or 30 days. Each day begins at sunset and each month with the sighting of the crescent moon. The Hijri year is about 11 days shorter than the solar year. Therefore, none of the Islamic religious festivals, including the Ramzan fast, Eid, and Hajj, corresponds in any way to seasons. There is no easy way to match the dates in the Hijri calendar with the dates in the Gregorian calendar, established by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. The Caliphate and their contributions. After Muhammad's death in 632, no one could legitimately claim to be the next prophet of Islam. As a result, his political authority was transferred to the elder Muslims with no established principles of succession. This created opportunity for innovations. The biggest innovation was the creation of the institution of Caliphate, in which the leader of the community became the deputy or Khalifa of the Prophet. The first four Caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, justified their powers on the basis of their close association with the Prophet and continued his work under the general guidelines he had provided. The twin objectives of the Caliphate were to retain control over the tribes constituted in the community, to raise resources for the state. Let's study about the first Caliph. First Caliph was Abu Bakr. Following Muhammad's death, many tribes broke away from the Islamic State. The first Caliph, Abu Bakr, suppressed the revolts by a series of campaigns. The second Caliph, Umar, shaped the Muslims' policy of expansion of power. He realized that rich booty could be obtained from expeditionary raids. The Caliph and his military commanders mustered their tribal strength to conquer lands belonging to Byzantine Empire in the west and the Sasanian Empire in the east. In three successful campaigns, Umar brought Syria, Iraq, Iran and Egypt under the control of Arabs. Military strategy, religious fervor and the weakness of the opposition contributed to the success of the Arabs. The third Caliph, Uthman, to extend the control to Central Asia. Within a decade of the death of Muhammad, the Arab Islamic State controlled the vast territories between Egypt and Afghanistan. The third Caliph, Uthman, was also a Quraysh by birth. He packed his administration with his own men to secure greater control. This further intensified the Meccan character of the state and the conflict with the other tribesmen. Opposition in Iraq and Egypt, combined with opposition in Medina, led to the assassination of Uthman. With Uthman's death, Ali became the fourth Caliph. The rift among the Muslims deepened after Ali fought two wars against those represented the Meccan aristocracy. Ali's supporters and enemies later came to form the two main sects of Islam, the Shias and the Sunnis. Ali established himself at Kufa and defeated an army led by Muhammad's wife in the Battle of the Camel. He was not able to suppress the faction led by Umayyad, a kinsman of Uthman and the governor of Syria. He was not able to suppress the faction led by Muawiyah, a kinsman of Uthman and the governor of Syria. Soon after, Ali was assassinated by a Kharji in a mosque at Kufa. After his death, his followers paid allegiance to his son Hussein and his descendants. Muawiyah made himself the next caliph in 1661, founding the Umayyad dynasty, which lasted till 750. Administrative changes introduced by the caliphs in the newly conquered territories. In all the conquered provinces, the caliphs imposed a new administrative structure headed by governors and tribal chieftains. The central treasury obtained its revenue from taxes paid by Muslims as well as its share of the booty from raids. And the caliph's soldiers, mostly Bedouins, settled in camp cities at the edge of the desert such as Kufa and Basra to remain within reach of their natural habitat as well as the caliph's command. The ruling class and soldiers received shares of the booty and monthly payments. The non-Muslim population retained their rights to property and religious practices on payment of taxes. The Umayyads and the changes introduced by them in administration. The first Umayyad Caliph, Muawiyah, moved his capital from Medina to Damascus. He adopted the court ceremonies and administrative institutions of the Byzantine Empire. He also introduced hereditary succession and persuaded the leading Muslims to accept his son as his heir. Changes introduced by Abdal-Malik. The Umayyad state was now an imperial power, no longer based directly on Islam, but on statecraft and the loyalty of Syrian troops. There were Christian advisors in the administration as well as Zoroastrian scribes and bureaucrats. However, Islam continued to provide legitimacy to their rule. The Umayyads always appealed for unity and suppressed rebellions in the name of Islam. Abdal-Malik adopted Arabic as the language of administration. He introduced an Islamic coinage. The gold dinar and silver dirham that had been circulating in the Caliphate were copies of Byzantine and Iranian coins. Abdal-Malik also made a highly visible contribution to the development of an Arab Islamic identity by building the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem.